So where are we? Yes, Abe is the Prime Minister of Japan, and he's made this big announcement that he wants to, during his tenure, to try and clear up the damage that was caused by Japan during the war, and to also address the damage done to Japan during the war, particularly during the years after the war with the American occupation. So there's a little bit of compromise to, shall we say, international issues, but predominantly his thrust is more towards nationalist interests. So the more right-wing Shinto sects, the more conservative ones, they are quite in favour of this move that Abe has made, of suggesting that whilst Japan caused problems, it also suffered problems, and the suffering was at the hands mostly of the Americans, that Japan needs to be built back up again and restored to its former glory, in a sense. It's ever so slightly like this whole kind of make America great thing, and put the great back into Great Britain with Brexit type palaver. It's a bit of a nostalgic thing for weren't we wonderful then? Can we go back to what we were like then?
Was that ever the case? Or are
they had far greater independence before America got there.
Right, yeah.
The Article 9 thing you got here was a compromise forced on Japan by the Americans that they should never be able to declare or instigate war. If someone declares war against them, they can retaliate, but they can't initiate.
Right.
And that has remained part of the Japanese constitution even after the Americans left in the 50s. So it's seen by some, I mean Abe himself and some of these quite conservative Shinto sects, as disempowering or emasculating Japan's capacity to be a world power, given that everyone else, America, China, Britain, Russia, etc., they can all launch war if they feel like it. They don't need anyone's permission to go to war, except possibly their electorate. But
hasn't anybody told them that they shouldn't have been?
China is worried that if he does indeed ditch Article 9, then what is the point of wanting the right to declare war unless you have plans to declare war?
Yeah. And they're closest.
Yes. So there's a bit of sort of collar feeling going on. I would imagine in this day and age you would have to be monumentally stupid to declare war on China. At least not if you live as close to China as Japan does. I mean, you might get away with it if you're America or something, but if the Japanese were to declare war on China, they would be flattened, I'm quite sure, very rapidly. But that kind of assumes politicians always act with a degree of sense, which, as history shows us, ain't necessarily the case. So there's all these ongoing problems. His political party, which is, I suppose, a little bit like the Japanese version of the Tories, it's quite kind of old-fashioned, kind of Japanese nationalism type thing, Japanese pride, all of that. They had a bit of a landslide in 2017 with the elections, so there's a huge swing vote-wise towards their style of politics. I'll play this clip in a second. It's an interview, BBC interview, between a Chinese person and a Japanese one, talking about the history of the tensions between the two countries and what it was like for the Japanese person to visit China and then the Chinese person visited Japan, and there's different sorts of kind of reflections on. They're being very polite to each other. They're not, throwing chairs or anything, but it's an honest reflection.
Well, I think on a personal level, we're quite friendly. We have lots in common in terms of culture, food,
all of that. But in terms of the war, we actually asked that question to a number of people in Japan and China, and many people said that they try not to talk about the war because it often makes things quite awkward. So what Hani and I had to go through for 2 weeks, forced to talk about the war all the time, was quite tricky.
How much of a journey was that for you, travelling to Japan, hearing things that were quite confrontational?
It was my first trip to Japan, so thinking back now, I wish I was on that trip for a different purpose. So my impressions could be very different from that.
Was it harder than you thought it would be?
It was much harder than I expected, because we spent the first 2 days, speaking to quite a number of nationalists, right-wing nationalists, who felt quite strongly about changing the way the history has been told in Japan. So it was a harsh beginning.
I mean, let me take you back then to your childhood. Mariko, what did you learn about what Japan did during the war when you were growing up?
So I was in Japan, I was raised in Japan until the age of 16. So I first learned about Japan's world history when I was 14. And you go through from human evolution to today in 1 year. So I was quite interested in war history because I had a grandfather who was very opinionated about the war. But I remember thinking, okay, we just spent 2 lessons on the entire war. And 14 years old, you're more interested in fashion and boys. How are you supposed to remember all of that? So after that, I traveled across Asia, visited war museums, and really strongly felt that what I learned at school wasn't enough. So I wrote an article about it, which became very, very controversial in Japan because obviously people thought that I was criticizing about my own country in front of global audience.
Japan has, though, apologised to China many times. That's known, of course, and there's been all this Japanese financial aid, $36 billion to China. Is that something, though, that the Chinese people recognise, or is their interpretation different as well?
I think that a number of Chinese people are aware of the apologize from some of the Japanese politicians occasionally, and the financial aid during a certain period of time. Nevertheless, it was not taught in our history textbooks, that's for one thing, but people still have channels to learn about that part of history. But saying that, the thing that people tend to, we can see some kind of protests, in 2016, 2012, and people say, why are you still so angry after Japan has been apologized? The thing is, there is a lack of consistency in the acts and words from Japanese politicians in particular. When you apologize, today and went to the US Supreme to pay respect to the war dead or war criminals, it kind of destroyed the trust or the very, weak foundation of, having a conversation between the Chinese public and the Japanese public. And that's something I think we need to talk about in internet communications.
And also, Mariko, even the historic facts are in dispute here. I mean, what happened in Nanjing, the 2 countries can't agree.
Indeed, we did speak to a number of people who said that all those supposedly civilians were just guerrilla fighters who dressed as civilians. Even a little bit more moderate historian would argue that there were only 200,000 people in the city of Nanjing, so how could China claim that more than 300 were killed? And also the Communist Party, just after the war, even during the war, when they were bringing this issue up, they were citing a lot lower numbers. So there are a lot of controversies there.
I mean, how did it feel to be sitting there and to be told by some Japanese people that this is all wrong, that what happened and simply didn't happen that way?
I think when you think about whether those nationals would talk to you in that way, and when you're actually in that position, it's quite different. I think it's the one thing that we have some debates about exact numbers of casualties during the Nanjing massacre. It is another when someone's saying in your face that it should not be called a massacre in the first place, it should be called an incident and trying to play it down. And that's kind of the thing that will provoke the deepest emotions on the back of your mind as a Chinese person.
Do you think that today's Japanese population should now be feeling guilt over what happened?
Can you repeat that question?
Do you think that Mariko, that other young Japanese should feel guilty about what happened?
I don't think Japanese people, ordinary people should, feel guilty about what the soldiers and the politicians did some 80 years ago. That's a different question. However, for politicians, it is important for politicians, including the Prime Minister, to recognize that they need to face the history with the honesty and with the very sincere attitude and consistency in their actions and words towards the neighboring countries and the people in those neighboring countries.
Marika, what are your emotions at these times? I mean, not only being at home in Japan, but when you went to China as well, did you feel a sympathy for what the people of your country once did, or do you dispute what happened? I mean, just take us through how you felt over this time.
Well, I actually visited Nanjing as a tourist. It sounds a little bit odd, but I was so interested that I had to see the evidence myself. And what I felt there was, firstly, very vulnerable. I didn't want people to find out I was Japanese, so I was thinking I'll pretend I was Korean if anyone asked, because all the evidence was so overwhelming. And even though I knew some of the arguments that some of the photographs might be fabricated and whatnot, but there was a section in the museum where Japanese soldiers were speaking to a Japanese journalist, admitting that he killed and raped. And that's when I thought, it's not about the number. Something horrible did happen. But this project was quite interesting in the sense that I started off criticizing our own education, but we also examined if China's patriotic education plays a role in today's tensions between the two countries. Heini mentioned about apologies not really taught at school, but also whether that sentiment against Japan, has it been played up in anti-Japanese war dramas on TV. So it was a difficult, even watching those dramas, even though you think that, okay, maybe people won't take this seriously, but all those emotions for 2 weeks was quite a challenging experience.
And what do you think now in terms of a political level? I mean, Shinzo Abe, once again, going to the Yasukuni Shrine. Every year we see Japanese politicians visit, but it is quite a political statement.
Indeed, I mean, I actually, as part of the program, I actually went there with my own grandfather because his uncle is among the warded who is enshrined there. And I felt so torn because, I mean, the Prime Minister, whether you believe him or not, he would say that he's there for the war dead, the 2.5 million Japanese soldiers, not the war criminals. My grandfather felt very strongly that he wanted to go with me to pay respect to his uncle. So I can understand that emotions, but at the same time, I could completely understand why that would provoke very strong reactions in China.
I mean, we have these pictures and these incidences of protests over the East China Sea. This is really hotting up. It's been going on for some time now. Given that, do you see things improving between the two countries in the years ahead?
I have to say I've become less optimistic after doing this project than I did before doing it. Because I was growing up with a quite favorable attitude towards Japan in the 1980s, 1990s. We were quite, familiar with Japanese pop culture, so it's quite a pleasant feeling for that country. But after this trip, I realized the gap of understanding between the two countries, between politicians and public, are much deeper than I ever thought. So I'm not 100% optimistic about the future between these two countries in terms of political tensions. However, I think between the public, between younger generations, there's still a chance because we have these cultural similarities between each other. But the starting point that we both need to dig into the history and face the truths, the facts happening in history, both in China and Japan. And that's a starting point for mutual understanding, and that's exactly what we have been trying to do.
That shrine that Prime Minister Abe was going to is one of the biggest, oldest shrines in Tokyo, or well, anywhere in Japan. What they've done, some kami are nature spirits, trees, rocks, rivers, etc. But there are some kami who are believed to have been human once upon a time, and to have walked the earth, and then that they've done some amazing thing in life, and so at death they've become a little bit like a saint, this kind of figure that can be contacted and communicated with, and so on. A few years ago, 14 of the Japanese generals and so forth who were executed at the end of the war as war criminals had been declared to be kami, so in effect beatified. And their shrine is at this big Shinto shrine in Tokyo, as well as it's not just for them, it's for other beings as well, but they've been added to the list of kami to be worshipped, and their photos are up there and everything. So it's a little bit like if Germany suddenly announced that they were going to make Eichmann into a saint.
Yeah.
And you can have
Robin
St. Adolf
Phillips,
and
yeah.
Hugely, hugely controversial
Yes.
thing to do. And it really does blur the whole barrier between politics and religion. In that normally there is a sense when someone becomes kami, somebody or another has had a vision, they've had a mystical experience, and that's been shared with other people. And there's this, a bit like the way the Catholic Church assesses whether someone should become a saint. There's a kind of checking process. So the Shinto shrines go through this process of saying, well, has anyone else had a vision? Has anyone else had a dream? And then only after a while does that person become seen as a kami spirit. Did anyone have a vision about these war criminals? Well, it's hard to imagine it happening, but the implication from a Western point of view, obviously, this is a sheer political, somewhat cheesy manoeuvre. From a Japanese point of view, they might argue, no, this is a genuine mystical revelation. Someone had a vision of this guy, someone had a vision of that guy. The odd bit of healing going on here. A few miraculous events, and Bob's your uncle, all 14 of them, are now somehow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes. So it comes as no surprise to anyone as the lady in there was saying that in China it's gone down like a bucket of cold sick. It really has. Just not. And every time the Prime Minister goes there for one of these photo shoots, the question is he going there just as a generic prayer, kind of religious, visit?
Just sticking a knife in and twisting it a bit more.
Yes, absolutely. Given his politics, it's easier to go for that interpretation than the official one, which is that he's just there to say a few prayers for the fallen soldiers and all this kind of thing. It's somewhat controversial. And there are lots of parallels to what we've gone through in Europe in terms of the extremes to which the Japanese went. Parallel some of the extremes. I mean, they didn't have Jewish death camps or anything like that, but they certainly had very extreme treatment of prisoners in camps. Not quite the industrial scale the Germans went to, but
they were very harsh, weren't they?
very harsh, yes.
Prisoners.
Yeah. Including female prisoners of war and all sorts of things that the Nazis themselves didn't do. Japanese did. It's grim. And as when they were disputing about the Man-King thing, and all these arguments about, was it 300,000 people, was it 250,000, this, that and the other, it has parallels and echoes to the kinds of conversations that, I think it was David Tyndall. I think he's disappeared back up on his own backside these days, but he had a 5 minutes of celebrity by publishing a book saying the Holocaust never happened.
Yeah.
But it sort of echoes to that kind of a conversation, where you could have a debate, was it 6 million, was it 5.5 million, was it 6.5 million? You could debate the number, and to a point you could debate it in a civilised fashion. But when you start saying it was 25 people, then there comes a point when you think, hang on a minute, this is not just a quibble of numbers, this is a outright denial. And similar conversations going between Chinese and Japanese historians, not only over making other things too, but some saying, oh no, it's just a little bit exaggerated, maybe it was a few thousand less. Others saying it was half that number, quarter of that number, and then you're sliding towards the denial end of the market. And one of them, the ladies mentioned the thing about someone faking photographs and photoshopping photographs of dead bodies after the war. Which, well, they wouldn't have called it photoshopping then, would they? Whatever the term, doctoring the photos or whatever the term is. Exactly the same conversations you can hear going on about photos of Auschwitz, photos of Belsen, photos of piles of corpses, people saying, oh no, that's not a real, that's a faked image, etc. It's not unknown for governments to fake evidence, but on certain subjects there's clearly huge sensitivities, and if you're going to suggest that that photo is faked, you're going to need some real kind of concrete backup, because even suggesting it is faked, as you say, it's twisting the knife, it's salt in the wounds and the rest of it. It really is setting people's backs up in exactly the same way that suggesting Holocaust photos are fake does to Jewish people, gypsies, etc. It opens up a can of worms. If you start denying it, the next thing you know, it's happening all over again. And that denial is not just, it's not like quibbling whether the Battle of Hastings took place on this day or the day after. It's more than just some pedantic, dull dispute of detail. It goes to the heart of something much, much more visceral. And that's why you've got, say, the youngsters less so, I suppose, but older generations really do get quite passionate about these issues. And a lot of the more hardline Shinto priests are all, elderly priests. They're of the generation where they didn't fight in the war, but their parents. And they will have memories of the mum and dad stories of things and what have you. So it is that kind of generation that is fueling, I suppose we would say, some of these disputes and arguments. And you do have a lot of people arguing in Japan that war is war, and horrible things happen in war. Should we all be 80 years, 90 years down the line wringing our hands with guilt because people did extreme things in war?
They would say that.
Yeah. And that kind of comes into these somewhat European arguments about the idea of a just war and fair play in war, and you can kill that person but you can't kill that person, and so the kind of things that still go on with the Middle East, and all. They've blown up a hospital. Oh well, they were hiding military personnel in the hospital, therefore it's a fair target, and all this sort of dispute that goes around and around and around. Never gets anywhere. But gets people very, very irate. They look like little wobbles in that picture, don't they?
No, I didn't.
No, they're
I remembered this.
We'll save it for next week anyway.
Well, we can do that next week, and I'll.
Well, Catherine's here then, hopefully. And so yes, there is this somewhat. I'm not sure if that counts as anime art, because I'm never wholly sure exactly what anime art is, aside from Taki. But there's a lot of this sort of slightly cartoonified artwork in depictions of Shinto deities, which it's obviously approved of within the culture, but I can't imagine how would I feel if it was something European and it was doing twee, silly cartoons. Would I get annoyed? I think I probably would do. It doesn't feel wholly respectful.
No, that's the word I was thinking. It's a little bit Wizard of Oz, isn't it?
It is. Have you ever seen Dogma?
Yes.
You know, that statue of Jesus they've got doing that. It kind of has a feel of that sort of slightly too that's a couple of pages from the Kijiki. And again, it's written the same way Chinese is in columns, and it's read in columns rather than in horizontally the way we do it here. So Kijiki just translates as records of ancient matters, and it's an account of lots of mythological stories, the creation of Japan, the doings of more human figures, kings and warriors and queens and what have you, as well as the doings of gods and deities and spirits and so forth. So it's a sort of mixture of what we would think of as historical with what we would think of as mythological, and no clear hardline distinction between the two, which, if we look at our own cultures going back a couple of thousand years, was not a distinction made here either. You look at early Irish histories, early Welsh histories, early Scandinavian histories, there's no clear-cut distinction between human activity and divine activity. The one kind of flows in and out of the other. If you genuinely believe, whether you believe in one god or 50 gods, if you genuinely believe in them, you see their presence in the human world as well as in the divine world. And there isn't a nice, neat red line with divine on that side and human on that side. It is constant in and out. So it only seems weird if your notion of history is secular. And you've got the idea that, oh, if it's about gods, that's all just made up nonsense, we'll put that in the box over there. And then you've got your real history about humans doing human-y stuff, and we put that in the box over here. That is a very modern Western division between mythology and history. Farther back in time you go, or still currently in many cultures, that division does not exist. Because the gods are real, what they do is real, it affects human stuff. It's understood in a very different way. So the stories that are being put to paper back in the 700s were old in the 700s.
Right.
So it's just, it took a while for anyone to actually write it down.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it would all be stories around the campfire type stuff. This is the latest version, if you like, of something going back to the year dot. Thinking in terms of ideas in Shinto, again you can start to see the echoes to Taoism, the echoes to China. That just as in Taoism there is no absolute truth, there are points of view and that word, experiences. So in Japan, with Shinto, it's the same. There is no absolute good, no absolute evil, no absolute right, no absolute wrong. There are points of view.
Can be naughty as well as
They
nice,
can,
can't they?
yes.
In the same way that Islamic.
Well, the jinn.
Yes.
Yes.
Can be.
All shades of moral perspective, yes, absolutely. I suppose if we said a fox goes and kills a chicken and brings the fox home, brings the chicken home to feed its cubs, the cubs are going to see that fox mother or father as a lovely, smashing, kindly, caring, thoughtful, and the rest of it. The chicken's family might have a somewhat different perspective on the matter. So whether something is right or wrong depends whether you're the fox or the chicken. And that both Shinto and Taoism is a strong sense that morality is quite situational. It depends which side of that fence you're on as to whether is Robin Hood an evil, thieving tow rag, or is he this great folk hero taking money from the greedy old barons and giving it to the poor benighted peasants?
That puts this different slant on the whole war thing, doesn't it?
Indeed. Yes. So what we would say, you slaughtered 100,000 people, that's wicked and terrible.
No, that's part of, that's just,
Yeah. It's perspective. Sometimes you've got to wonder certain things. Maybe is there a good perspective on this? When you hear about some of the things that went on in those experimentation camps, it just
I've never heard of those before.
It's absolutely on a par with as the horrors of the Nazis, and as bad as what they were doing. And you just think, all right, morality is situational, but come on. There comes a point when you've got things.
That's bending it.
Yes, a bit too far on that one. Quite an upbeat faith, quite jolly, in the same way that Taoism is really quite jolly. It's about living and enjoying life and trying to make people happy, trying to spread a bit of fun and a bit of laughter in the world. And there is a lot of that, which reminds me of thing from Roman religion. For the Romans, you've got the very word jovial, to be jovial, means to be like Jove, to be like Jupiter. And there's a number of rituals in the Roman calendar where Jupiter is invoked and called upon, and the priests doing the calling have to laugh. You imagine a slightly kind of cardboard sitcom laughter.
Sort of channeling.
Yes, going ho ho ho. So in the middle of this very serious Roman ritual, and they're all very straight-laced and po-faced, and they're being all very wordy and what have you, and suddenly they've all got to burst into laughter. So I don't know if somebody just cracks a joke quietly in the background and they all have a good belly laugh or what have you. But that is how Jupiter is made to be present through laughter. Which is, you always think he is the god of the state, the god of the emperor. And politicians, he's the politician's god. Not people you often laugh, you may laugh about or at, but very rarely with.
And in private.
So there's an element of that, kind of, that laughter is sacred for the Japanese and the Japanese. It makes life bearable in all sorts of ways, and it's intrinsic to religion, which I think sometimes we lose sight of a little bit in the West. It's easy to get a bit too straight-laced, a bit too pompous and what have you at times. And, you need a good laugh every now and then.
But I think if you don't, I think you lose the human side.
Absolutely, yes.
Because we use humour to get through.
Yes.
And I think if you lose humour in things, I think...
Yeah. There's if you've ever read any of the Canterbury stories in
No, I haven't read them, no.
They're lovely. There's one book in which the nice old priest dies of old age, and everyone loved him, and his dear old father, what's his name, he's popped his clogs, and the new priest that gets sent along by the bishop is horrible. Everyone hates him. He's this bad-tempered, miserable. His sermons are all blood and fire and death and damage. No laughter, no nothing, no kindness, and no one can stick him. And they're all thinking about how lovely and jolly old Father What's-His-Face was, and they used to have a good laugh in his sermons, and it's that contrast between the real kind of blood and thunder end of the market and the gentle, kind of nice old parish priest, good old country boy type thing at the other end. And he dies. Someone murders him, and department and no surprises on that one. And it is that kind of the need for the nice old jollity.
Yeah.
You can have a bit too much fire and brimstone. The notion of people doing dreadful things is often linked into the idea that certain spirits, the naughty kami, that loiter around, a bit like the Greek idea of the daimones taking possession of people, that sometimes these naughty kami get a hold on someone and influence them for the worse. And people who do vile, dreadful things are sometimes understood in the context that maybe they are possessed, maybe they're under the influence of one of these malevolent spirits. So it's kind of an externalization of evil, if you like. The devil made me do it, sort of thing. Which is an odd one, and it kind of explains some really strange features of Japanese squash, strange to the Western man. I can't remember his name now. There was a bit of a scandal a few years ago in one of the big Japanese cities, when a relatively well-off man was found to have murdered a bunch of people and eaten them. And he became known as the cannibal.
Yeah.
And he was sent to prison for a few years, not as many years as he would get if he'd have done that over here.
Right.
And he's now out of prison. He's finished his sentence, and he's become a bit of a TV celebrity.
Not a chef by any chance.
Ooh, I think not. He's been interviewed on TV, and he's got a bit like some of these ex-politicians, like Michael Portillo, who've been not desperately popular when they're in power, but after they're out, they become TV
So
presenter
your
type
past
characters.
dalliances aren't held against you in
No, quite the same way they would be
Oh.
in this country. Because I can't, can't remember the last time we had a cannibal in Britain. But if someone were found to be eating their neighbours, well, A, they'd probably die in prison, but even if they lived long enough to get out, you can't really imagine them turning up on breakfast TV for a cosy chat on the sofa with...
Here's Morgan.
Let's hope he'd have Piers Morgan. Yum, yum, yum. A bit oily, I would have thought. But it's we wouldn't make a figure out of them.
No.
They would hopefully disappear into oblivion, never to be heard of again. But there's almost this sense of well, the spirits aren't in you anymore, therefore you're okay to be around now. Which can't say that I'd want to hang around with someone I knew was a cannibal.
Not what sizing you up.
No. There's been similar. Well, we won't go into any detail in a bit, but their attitudes to child pornography, being not just photographs but sort of drawings and paintings and all that kind of thing, cartoons in magazines, comics rather, I should say. Some of them are illegal to export in Britain because they break our laws, but they don't break Japanese law. They have tolerance of things we would not tolerate at all.
Like making their doll thingies.
Yes. It's a bit ick, some of it, and there is a sense that things can be managed in a way that we just wouldn't do. I can't say as I feel that the Japanese approach to it is better. I think I prefer our approach to it, but different cultures, different approaches. This is a little ritual program.
More than 100 people in Tokyo celebrated the new year in a very unusual way by taking an ice-cold bath.
Oh, I saw this.
Dressed in traditional white clothing, the men and women jogged around a shrine and chanted before lowering themselves into the freezing cold water. This purification ritual is a central tenet of Shinto, a Japanese religion that is as old as the country itself. So what exactly is Shinto? Well, it's the largest religion in Japan, practiced by an estimated 80% of the population. Back in the 6th century, indigenous Japanese people invented the word Shinto to distinguish their already existing faith from Buddhism, which was spreading throughout the region. Over time, Shinto and Buddhism came to coexist peacefully. Shinto is considered more a way of life rather than a specific set of beliefs or worship of a central deity. Most Japanese people identify as both Buddhist and Shinto. So how can someone follow two religions at once? Well, Shinto doesn't have many of the characteristics associated with religion. Unlike Christianity or Buddhism, it has no official founder or sacred text. Shinto does not try to explain the world in a sense of right and wrong, and thus there are no Shinto preachers or missionaries. The only goal of Shinto is to be in touch with kami, or spiritual energy, through sacred rituals. These include weddings, funerals, worship at a shrine or at a home, and huge festivals. The word Shinto means way of kami. Kami is extremely complex, but basically they are sacred spirits that exist in earthy objects like mountains and trees, and in concepts like fertility. Kami also has an ancestral form as humans become kami after they die. The sun goddess Amaterasu is the most important kami. In Japanese mythology, the royal family is thought to be descended from Amaterasu, beginning with the first emperor, Jimmu. It was thought that prayers and offerings to kami spirits at Shinto shrines and festivals will wash away evil spirits and thus purify a person or object. This process is the lifeblood of the Shinto practice, happening on a daily, weekly, seasonal, lunar, and annual basis. In fact, taking part in ritualistic worship and purification is the entirety of their faith. This has garnered criticism, as some liken Shinto worship to a performance rather than an act of devotion based on values and beliefs. Adherents to Shinto, however, think of rituals as a religious experience, one that binds a community together even more so than shared beliefs. Although Shinto is thousands of years old, it still has an active presence in Japanese life. For instance, new buildings are purified by a Shinto priest, and many Japanese-made cars are blessed during the assembly process. Japan's national sport, sumo, is directly derived from Shinto rituals, and symbols of purity can be found on the ring and on sumo garments. Many Japanese people keep a tiny shrine altar in their home, and local shrines play a huge role in communities, bringing people together for festivals and hosting weddings and funerals. Whether or not they identify as religious, virtually everyone in Japan is, in some sense, a part of Shinto. We can't do episodes like this without our sponsors, and this episode is brought to you by Domain.com. If you're an entrepreneur, innovator, or building a small business,
it's very much what you'd call an orthopraxic approach. It's all about what you do, more so than what you believe specifically. Although you do have the multitude of gods, which are the focus point. So even though the American guy there was saying about shared belief in a common God, he's coming at that from the somewhat Christian background of there being a singular God, which everyone believes in. So you can be Shintoism, you can worship, one Shinto worships this deity, another Shinto worships a different deity. They don't all necessarily have to worship exactly the same deity to be classed as part of the Shinto faith. So it's that's I suppose from maybe, well, I don't know what religion that presenter was, but he's American, so chances are he's probably Christian. From that point of view, it would seem odd that there isn't the same one for everybody. There's a kind of a smorgasbord to choose from, and at different seasons, different deities will come to the fore, and there'll be the deity of rice at one time of the year and the deity of the sea at another time of the year, and it's kind of a little bit like one of those clocks where the figures go in and out according to the weather. Makes sense from a Japanese point of view, and it's pretty much what you would have found in just about any country in the world 2,000 years ago, and obviously some parts of the world still very much today. So it's a very, very common global pattern, and the movement from that to all being focused on the same deity is a comparatively recent thing in the grand scheme of history. So it's a different understanding of what constitutes religion, more by what you do than by what you are thinking about whilst you do it, or who you're thinking about whilst you do it. A bit of a different approach to it. The Toriai, which is the gate, that big red thing, you can see it at the front of just about every Shinto temple. And when the guys talk about the little household shrines, the little wooden boxy things, most of them have either a wooden one or a painted one on the side of the shrine. So you either have a little mini gate in front of the shrine, or you paint a picture of the gate on the shrine.
They've got those in Chinatown, haven't they?
Yes, to enter into Chinatown under the gate is to pass through the gate, is to enter into the space, into the city. You have one big, quite really big scale ones in bays, so that ships sail through them to get into the bay, so they are passing through the gate to enter into the place of sanctuary, place of safety. And conversely, you go back out through them, obviously, so it's this, well, how can you think of it? The wardrobe in Narnia, in and out the world, as you go through different dimensions, different realities in a sense, passing through space. So the unity between state and Shinto is primarily in the sense that the Shinto priests participate in the blessings of when a new emperor takes the throne, or the old emperor dies, or when a new prime minister takes office, or the old prime minister leaves, blessings of government buildings when they're being, the foundation stone is laid, all that kind of thing. It's not that the politicians have to believe specific things, it's more that there is a Shinto priest present to officiate activities and events. So again, it's the ritualistic presence rather than that they all have to subscribe to a particular set of values or a particular doctrine or anything like that. It's kind of, containing politics in the format of religion, in a sense. Back in the day, as we talked about earlier, the emperor, and by extension the whole of the emperor's family, are seen as direct descendants of Amaterasu. Therefore, their decisions have, or had, past tense, holiness about them. So back in the day when Hirohito said we are going to war, it wasn't just some politician announcing we're going to war and half the country rolls their eyes and says, now what? Rather, this was a declaration from a descendant of a goddess. Therefore, it has the weight of divinity behind it, which changes the extent to which you can refuse what a divine figure says. So it's one thing to disagree with a politician because they're just a politician. It's another thing to disagree with someone who is of the holy blood, and it can, you've got to have a bit of a brass neck to to go and do that. So, which is one of the reasons, of course, why the Americans shunted the emperor into a corner and said, "You're not divine anymore. You're just."
Which would have been a huge loss of.
Absolutely, massively so. It would, I suppose, a bit like the Chinese did with the Dalai Lama, to elbow him into a corner, and are now threatening that they're going to find the next Dalai Lama when he's dead. They'll find the next one. It'll be their pet Dalai Lama, rather than the real thing. Or if someone marched into the Vatican and said, right, we're not having him as Pope anymore, we're having this one, how that would impact on Catholicism then. How would Catholics relate to a imposed Pope, one that they didn't want, that they'd been ordered by some weird foreign power? You've got to have him now. It wouldn't go down well. there would be a lot of resistance to that kind of
I suppose the underground Catholic Church in China, that
yes,
same idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. They don't want to be approved of bishops, they want their own.
Yeah.
It's a sticky area when politics, especially foreign politics, outside politics, starts getting involved in a religion and saying you've got to have this, you've got to have that. It's maybe not the wisest move the American government ever engaged in with Japan. This is a depiction, artistic license, no one knows quite what he looked like, but it's as good an image as any, I suppose, of Motori Norinaga, who was the individual who is regarded as sort of reviving Shinto, or bringing a lot of the scriptures and the mythological writings back into the forefront of people's minds, whereas it had somewhat dwindled in his early life, and he went great guns to try and reanimate it and bump it up to the fore again, and bring it into prominence. One of his teachings is in the Musubi, which is the idea of all things emerging from their cosmic beginnings, this energy that permeates the cosmos as a result of creation. I suppose you could get a bit science fiction-y and talk about the Force, a bit Jedi. Yeah. It's kind of like that idea, that Musubi permeates from the very beginning of the universe, emanates through everything, and every act of creativity partakes of Musubi. Painting a picture, carving a sculpture, etc. Very much an imperialist or a royalist, if you like, which is interesting. I suppose it kind of begs questions for us in terms of the Queen as the head of the church, because nobody really sees her as a mystical figure in that sense, but she is the head of the church. It's kind of become divorced from. You could go back far enough in time, the king as the divinely appointed figure would have had perhaps more kudos in the eyes of the public than the Queen has these days. So no one is really, even when she's doing her Christmas message, does anyone watch it with the sense that this is a sermon or a revealed message from a semi-divine figure? I can't imagine anyone really thinks of it in that light, but once upon a time, that's how the Japanese royal family would have been viewed. But if they stood up and said something, then this was at least partially divine statement that was being delivered to the public. A very different way of thinking. Wang Yangming was a Chinese philosopher. So we've got pre-punch-up time, when Japanese philosophers were willing to listen to Chinese philosophers, and it wasn't seen as quite such a politically divisive thing to do back in the day. The notion of intuitive morality is an interesting one, because it's sort of in keeping with Western ideas of natural law and natural order, that most people know in their hearts what is right and wrong, with the odd exception. But most people know what is right and wrong. Therefore, morality emerges not from a set of rigid teachings, but rather from a natural human common sense understanding that going around murdering and raping and robbing is just not very nice. You don't need someone to tell you it is not nice, because you know in and of yourself that it is not a good thing to do, and it's only the severely warped and stupid and awful who don't get that. And maybe they need a bit of moral pronouncement, but the rest of us know it. So there is this sense that rather than being a list of the gods say don't do this or do that, rather it is just use your sense. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. So you don't have this kind of specified list. It's taken as given to a large extent. You've got three main types of Shinto, and we'll look at these a little bit more next week, picking up on some of them. Jinja Shinto is the shrine-based, and a lot of the shrine-based ones these are old shrines that have been there centuries. Often the priests who run these shrines and priestesses who run these shrines are part of the same family. So it's handed down by, they don't own the shrine, it's not personal property, but they are the ancestral keepers of the shrine. So the guy or woman who is there today is the great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of the very first person who was there back in year dot when it was built. And it becomes a sort of a tradition within families and communities to maintain the shrines and perform the ceremonies, perform the rituals. There is no overt expectation that the people doing that have to be especially holy. As long as they do the ritual properly and they remember the right words in the right order and make the right gestures and have a nicely ironed costume to put on and all the rest of it, that is more important than whether they are particularly lovely people in and of themselves.
So it's come out of the orthopraxy.
Absolutely. And it kind of questions like the Catholic Protestant schism, where the expectation was that the priests ought to be holy, and if you can point out to a bunch of them who aren't, then that undermines the church. You've got to have the expectation in the first place. Whereas if you had a schism here, it might be, oh, they're getting the ritual wrong, oh, she said that in the wrong order, oh! That's the kind of objections you'd get going, rather than, someone is a bit of a, I don't know, bit dishonest or a bit putting it around a bit too much or whatever. You wouldn't have those kind of objections. More to do, it would be more their performance rather than their moral standards in private life that would be the issue. Which it kind of opens up. But then they're not doing the altar Christi. They're not expected to be in a position of representing divine figure.
No.
They are doing the ritual. They're not an embodiment of the gods. They're just
What's
doing
the
the ritual.
hierarchy? Is there a hierarchy
There is,
of
yeah.
priests?
When you kind of get the equivalent of a high priest and trains up young priests, and some people who specialise in certain styles of ritual, who are regarded as experts. I suppose you kind of can consult them if you want to learn that type of ritual or divination and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Similar to the Shinto priests, really, in a lot of respects. State Shinto, Koku Shinto, is that's the whole. Not so much present these days. It has kind of gone a bit sidelined, but that was the one very much tied up with the royal family and performing the grand ceremonies of state to all these big, grand political occasions. But as I say, that's largely dwindled in this day and age. It is the one that is being sought to be revived by the more traditionalist sections, but it's not really big in terms of numbers or anything like that. Kyoho Shinto, the sect Shinto, that kicked off 19th century. There's 13 different variations of it these days, so it's kind of schisms of schisms of schisms in the sense as they're sort of proliferated. A bit like the Baptist movement, every week there's another variation. Can't keep track of it all. The 13 variations, each one was founded by a particular figure who is still highly regarded as the sort of guru, passing on wisdoms of that particular way of doing things. The Minzoku Shinto, the folk Shinto, that's been knocking around since the year dot and is mostly ancestrally based. So the argument in that video clip when he was talking about them only getting the word Shinto to distinguish themselves from the Buddhists, prior to the arrival of Buddhism, like a lot of cultures, they didn't necessarily have a word for what they did, because they just did it. And you only kind of need a word if you need to distinguish between two things. If everyone does the same thing, you don't necessarily need a word for it, because that's what you do. It's only when you say, well, we're not them, that people go, well, what are you if you're not them then? And that's when you need a word to say us. When everyone is us, you don't have a word. So you look at a lot of tribal cultures, they don't necessarily have a word for their own religion, because it's just what we do. So that's the early version, in essence. In terms of how the world is understood at a cosmological level and how it's presented, one version you've got this sort of tiered three-dimensional view with the Takama Nahara, the plane of high heaven where the spirits come from, right at the top. So sort of like Olympus for the Greeks. Where we exist is Nakatsukumi, the middle world, middle land, which is a kind of very similar translation to the Midgard in the Scandinavian sources, which is where Tolkien got Middle Earth from. We are Middle Earth. And then you have Yomi no Kuri, which is the underworld where the dead go for a period before they move on up. And it's also where the destructive and the dangerous and scary kami reside. So above, here, and below. Which parallels heaven, hell, and earth. Similar kind of a way of thinking, similar kind of structure. The alternate way is the two-world version, which sees this world and the perpetual world, Tokongo, which is where all of the spirits, good, bad, and otherwise, dwell. So effectively, the two-dimensional version shoves high heaven and the underworld into one, and just says there's here and there's there, the two worlds. There's an interesting parallel to early Celtic ideology in that they spoke about Elishino, which is the other world, the world where the fairies and the weird things come from. There's this world and that world, and occasionally they bump. and sometimes things fall out of one world and land into the other world. What little we know about the early Celtic view of the afterlife suggested that when you die in one world, you'll be born into the other, and use kind of tennis ball between the two worlds.
Yeah.
And that the other world, it's not all, like the cartoon version of heaven, where it's all clouds and hearts. In the other world, you eat, you drink, you get married, you do similar sorts of things that you would in this world. It's just full of odd things. Mind you, they probably sit there saying we're full of odd things by comparison. And it's an idea that arguably comes from Siberia and Mongolia, which we'll get on to week 10, 11, whatever it is. We get on to Mongolia. Very shamanistic ideas, very tribal, cultural ideas of moving between spirit world and physical world. And that the two are never wholly separate. They're constantly in and out of each other. So again, that idea of history between actual events, mythical events, makes no sense from this perspective, because there never is a clear-cut division between what's happening in this world and what's happening in the other world, and how they interact with one another. Confucius had a bit of an impact, not directly in his own lifetime, but in terms of his followers and students and so on. So Confucian teachings round about the 5th century, and then over the next 200 years, gradually sort of flowering a little bit, growing, moving around, having an impact, but never to quite the same extent that Buddhism did. So Confucianism has always been a relatively minor belief in Japan, whereas Buddhism has become a lot more prevalent, a lot more dominant. You get some things like Ryobu Shinto and Shano Shinto, which are a bit of everything mixed into one. Bits of Buddhist ideas, bits of Confucian teaching, bits of old-fashioned Shinto stirred up in a pot. So it's not wholly one thing, wholly another. You could, for a comparison, think of stuff like Candomblé or Santeria in Central and South America, where you've got bits of Catholicism, bits of African religion, bits of Central American religion, all kind of whizzed up in a blender, and it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins, and it's just kind of a Frankenstein job, a bit of everything stitched together, and it works. For the people who follow it, it works. It doesn't make an awful lot of sense from a very kind of assiduous academic angle, because it's a mishmash. But
I could see it all working, and you can argue with Christianity.
Well, bits cobbled.
Yeah.
Absolutely, same for Islam. Same for a lot of it's bits of this, bits of that, joined together.
Yeah.
It's just the way of the world. Sometimes you can't see the situations, and sometimes you can. With Izawa Shashishya, you've got him bringing in ideas in the 19th century that try to fuse Confucian views on obedience to the system, to the emperor, Chinese emperor, and transfer those ideas onto the Japanese emperor, and suggest this would work just as well in Japan as it did in China, as a system in which the emperor is the father of the country, and so the filial loyalty each family should have to the father of the family extends upwards to the father of the empire. And so the empire is a big family, in essence, which is kind of what Mozi was trying to argue, but never got terribly far with.
Yeah.
Except he took it in the line that if the empire is a big family, why do you need to get so fussed about a small family? Just have loyalty to the big family, which is very un-Confucian. You should always have loyalty to your family in Confucianism. Whatever you think about the emperor, family is always primary in the Confucian approach. So tried to bring it into Japan. Some people said, no, this is just a load of old kiboshes. You're adapting a Chinese system to a Japanese system. It doesn't work. So it wasn't desperately well received. But that the sect based on those teachings, those ideas, has been sort of doing around, and that quote there about Japan is the land of kami and its people are the descendants of the kami, forms a bedrock of the modern day nationalism. That the Japanese people are, the kami in this sense includes everything from the gods down to the smallest little nature spirit. It's a generic word that incorporates the whole range from tiny to cosmic. The Japanese people are the children of the gods, the children of those forces, and therefore superior to anyone else who is not Japanese. As an idea, which is it Catherine that's doing the essay about interaction between East and West, I think. It kind of picks up on some of that when Western people go over and want to learn about Shinto, they don't bar them from doing it or anything like that. They just think, why? What's it got to do with you? Go away. You've got your own religion. Go and play with that. Stop bothering us. Because as a white person, a black person, an Indian person, whatever, you're not descended from the kami. Lord knows what you are descended from. Who cares, in a sense? There's no particular account for what them foreign lot are descended from. We're just not descended from gods, therefore, who cares? So it's, can you commune with the kami if you are not descended from the kami? Part of the it kind of raises some interesting questions for the diaspora, where the Japanese people have moved to other parts of the world, in that certain kami, the family guardians, go with you. The Ujigami that we mentioned at the start. So they travel with you, where you go, they go. But if you are in Japan and you go to a waterfall, you honour the kami of the waterfall. It is there in the waterfall. If you live in Michigan and you go to some lovely spot in Michigan, is there a kami there? If there is, it's obviously not Japanese kami. Yes. So how do you relate to the land when you're not in Japan? Because you'll get some people saying, a beautiful place is a beautiful place wherever it is in the world, and you honour the spirit of the place, which is a very Roman thing to do. But is it part of the kami family, or is it part of some other bunch of entities? And maybe, if you are whichever Native American group, it would have been in Michigan, I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe it's their spirits, and it's their right to honour those spirits, and as a resident in the country, as a sort of late arrival in the country, do you honour them? Or do you say, no, this is for the native people to honour, and I should just sort of stand at a polite distance and wave them over and what have you? How do you relate? And there's no kind of clear-cut prescription, because in essence the texts and so on that were written down, the Kojiki were not written by people who expected their readers to be anywhere other than in Japan. They weren't giving tourist guides for what you do when you go and visit weird people in Britain or weird people in Spain or wherever. So there is no clear-cut sense of what it is in other parts of the world, and whether, as a Shintoist, you should be worshipping them or not, or do you just stick to the Japanese? And what if you get one of these weird white people or one of these weird African people coming along and saying they want to worship Japanese deities? Do you sort of say, well, if you must, you must? Do you welcome them in? Do you just say, well, you're a tourist, stand in a corner, or will the kami talk to them because they're not descended from the Japanese kami? It's a bit of an oddity, because this is a fairly late. The idea of moving across the globe is a late concept in this theology, and so there's nothing in the theology to prepare people for what to do.
And there's no conversion in Shinto, is there? But there is in Buddhism.
Yes.
So is there enough in Buddhism to be able to have conversion as such, but a teaching of ritual that perhaps may not have been required.
Potentially these sort of things like the Ryobo and so on, the merged ones that are a bit of everything mixed in together, they can allow and integrate the kind of, you've got the elements of the Buddhist initiatory ritual combined with other factors. Because Buddhism is the earliest known proselytizing religion to seek converts. It has that kind of ritual and mental approach and philosophical underpinnings to say this is what you do. Therefore you can have someone of any ethnicity become Buddhist, because it is designed for that. It is designed to go out and bring people in, whereas Shinto never was. I'm sure at some point they'll come to a conclusion about what the kind of philosophical bedrock is here, but there's no sort of real prescription for what you do in these unexpected occasions. When you have someone who's not Japanese who wants to go and do things at a Japanese shrine, or what you do if you're living outside of Japan and you wonder whether or not you should talk to the local spirits. Wing it, I suspect. That's what most people do in these situations. It kind of raises issues about spiritual tourism, but that also, within obviously you've got this nationalistic movement which says, stick to your own. That's not an idea we're used to in the West, because we are used to the idea of conversion.
Yeah.
So ethnicity tied up with religion is a bit of a weird thing in the West. Closest you obviously get is Judaism. There's a concept of that. But again, they've never gone out trying to convert people to Judaism. In fact, they almost put up hurdles. If you really want to convert, you've got to go through the hoops. You can't just do it at the top of the Walker. You've got to put a real effort into that one. It's a confusing idea. The Junzi notion we looked at very briefly last week when we were talking about Moism. But it's an idea that Moism got from Confucianism. There is the Junzi essentially means aristocrat, gentleman, upper class type, who is seen as the hard-working, industrious, noble, very morally upstanding, good, decent person to aspire to be, but has become heavily identified with a caste system. So it's less. What started out in Confucianism that anyone could become Junzi by being hardworking, industrious, and the rest of it. But there has become this tendency to link it to a class, and you're born that way. You have breeding, well, you've got the accent and the right schools and all the rest of it to go with it.
Yeah.
And therefore it becomes submission to your social superiors, kowtowing to the boss, rather than quite what it started out as. Zhaoren is essentially the early Chinese view of I suppose what we can call a parvenu, some sort of jumped up money grabbing little twit who's got no class, no cultural cachet at all. They're just an oik with money. As being the opposite side, to succeed in business you need to have dignity and class, not just money. So it's a rebuke to the more materialistic end of the market, the rich. The five constants that are called the Wushan, as concepts that have come from China and merged into understanding within Shinto as well. 5 things that people should aspire to lead is to have etiquette as an idea, and initially very much prominent within Confucianism, which is where you get the tea ceremonies from in Japan, and that whole very kind of formal, turn the pot and you've got to do this and all that. It's about ritualism, and the idea that inner harmony comes from following the form. If you don't follow the form, you lose the harmony that goes with a ritual. it misses something. It's about maintaining inner order through ritual with other people, which then extends to the wider community. Yi is looking after your nearest and dearest and being dutiful. It's quite a sort of, I suppose you could say, almost like a Victorian idea of duty, of doing the right thing, looking after granny and all the rest of it. Ji is to apply your mind, still very, very prominent in China and Japan and other East Asian countries. And that's when we talk about the tiger mothers the other week, these sort of parents who terrorise their kids into doing extremely well or else. That is very much part of the Ji, the sort of, you must develop your mind and you must be a doctor or a barrister or something very high blown if you can possibly do it, do it. No excuses. Jin is to maintain your decency even when no one else can see you maintaining your decency. So it should not just be in public. Do the right thing even when no one is looking. In the understanding, I suppose, that your ancestors are always looking. So even if you're the only living person in the room, you may not be the only person in the room. Therefore, you should always maintain your values, your standards, etc. And Ren is to be kind, compassionate, and help the needy, and so on. Reasonable standards to live by. The political element comes in with, again, the idea of the emperor, going back to the very first emperor as the son of Amaterasu, and annual gatherings to, well, once upon a time it would have been to virtually worship the emperor as an incarnate godlike being, but over the centuries that has dwindled down somewhat and become more kind of general patriotism and a bit of flag waving and a bit of pomp, ceremony and tradition and all the rest of it that people lord over love a bit of that. You've got a lot of shrines dedicated to the emperor himself. So you see 3,000 of them back in the 10th century. That number has gone somewhat down. And in no short measure because of the American presence during the 40s and 50s. But there is this move to start them up again, to get them going once again and have a bit of, in the good old days when we worshipped the emperor and knew where we are. Go back to the good old days. So next week, a bit of assignment thought, a bit more on Shinto and going into that, and we'll look at some of the myths and stories around Amaterasu and the other, a couple of the other principal deities.
What about this one? Oh.
Should be.
This one?
Don't think so. You've got the essay and the storytelling bit.
Oh, Missionaries, oh, that's right. Oh. Watch myself into such a just work.